All right, so today we're diving into the world of kimono.
Ooh, fun.
Right. Kimono. They're so beautiful and intricate.
They are really stunning.
I think a lot of people, myself included, are kind of mesmerized by them, but then we're also kind of like, well, is it okay if if I wear one?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it kind of leads us into that whole conversation around cultural appreciation
Mm-hmm.
and when does it tip over into appropriation.
Exactly. And so to unpack all of this today, we're really excited to be taking a deep dive into this article by Saki Yoshida called "Is It Rude for Foreigners to Wear Kimono?" It's on The Real Japan.
I love that site.
Me too.
So many interesting articles.
And she is, she's Japanese and she's really passionate about kimono.
Okay.
But she even talks about how, like, her own thinking on this question has evolved over time. Yeah. So, she starts off by saying she didn't necessarily think it was rude.
Oh, okay.
And she kind of talks about how, growing up in Japan, like, Western clothes were just kind of the norm
Right.
for everyday wear, even for her.
Mhm.
Kimono or something, more for special occasions. And, they can be very expensive.
Which is interesting, right? Because it speaks to how cultural contexts can differ even within the same culture.
Totally, yeah.
It's not always an us versus them, outsider versus insider perspective.
Yeah.
There are nuances even within how a culture views its own traditions.
Absolutely. And so as she kind of goes on this journey, like, she even decides to take this kimono fitting course to kind of like,
Yeah.
really, I guess, like, experience it and understand it. But she talks about how during this course, she kind of started to realize that some people were, like, very, very particular about how the kimono was worn.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like, very strict about it. And that got her thinking, like, okay, so if it's this kind of, I don't know, delicate even for people within the culture,
Right.
to kind of navigate, like, how much more, is it for someone coming from a totally different background?
Absolutely. And it just speaks to that need to approach cultural exchange, I think, with a certain level of humility.
Yeah.
Just that genuine desire to learn and understand all of the nuances at play, because there's so many.
Yeah, and so she even talks about how, during the class, she kind of saw how some people were really quick to critique other people's, even if they were Japanese, like, how they were doing it. And she was just kind of like, wow, like, it made her even more aware of, I guess, the pressures and even judgments, even within, Japanese culture around, like, this very traditional clothing.
It's like anything that's held sacred within a culture, right?
Right.
You want to see it respected and represented authentically.
Right, and it seems like she really, like, I don't know, she just became, like, even more fascinated by kimono, and she talks about how, she starts traveling outside of Japan wearing her own kimono and just seeing the reactions that she got.
Interesting.
And she even ends up connecting with this group of kimono enthusiasts in Germany, which is so cool, right? Like, it's so interesting how these shared passions can just, like, bring people together.
It's a beautiful example of that, yeah.
But here's where it gets kind of, I don't know, complicated. She was looking at a photo from this group and she saw someone wearing a kimono in a style that she really associated with, with sex workers in Japan.
Oh, wow.
And it was just really, I think, jarring for her.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Even though she knew, like, it wasn't intentional, it still brought up, a lot of, I think, probably, like, complicated emotions.
It just shows how complex cultural context and interpretation can be.
Yeah.
Like, what might seem like a simple fashion choice in one culture can carry, like, a completely different meaning and weight in another.
Yeah, and she even talks about how she felt like she needed to say something.
Oh, really? What happened?
Yeah, so she kind of, she wanted to just make the group aware, like, hey, be mindful of this, like, this is the association, maybe not what you're going for. And, she really wanted to do it in a way that wasn't, shutting down their love for kimono.
Right.
But, it didn't quite go as planned. It's like, it seems like instead of, kind of getting that understanding, it just kind of led to some, like, people feeling judged,
Yeah, that's so tough.
Which I kind of get, right? Like, if you're really excited about something and then someone's like, well, just so you know.
Yeah.
This is.
It can feel like you're being accused of something you didn't intend,
Exactly.
even when it comes from a good place.
Right.
It can be hard to hear.
Yeah, and she actually even talks about how it kind of caused this, like, I guess, a little bit of a rift in the group.
Oh, no.
And it made her feel like she was, like, kind of becoming this, like she says, quote unquote, another critical Japanese person.
Which is so interesting because it highlights this kind of the internal struggle that can exist within a culture, right?
Totally.
Between wanting to share these beautiful things with the world, but then also feeling this need to protect them.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like this kind of cultural stewardship, right? Like
yeah.
feeling responsible for making sure that something so important isn't misrepresented.
Absolutely. And so she moves back to Japan after this experience. And as she's kind of reflecting on everything, she talks about how, maybe there was a way she could have like approached it a little bit differently,
Mm.
like a little gentler or just, and she really starts to kind of understand like even the perspective of people who might seem overly critical.
Right.
She's like, it's because they care so much,
Yeah, absolutely.
about protecting these traditions.
It's that deep sense of care that can sometimes come across as, being overly critical.
Totally. But here's what I thought was so interesting, right? Like even after all of this, after this whole experience, she doesn't want to discourage people from like experiencing kimono.
Okay.
She still wants people to like see the beauty in them.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, she even talks about how there's this kimono rental shop in Nagoya and how they really encourage tourists to come in and try on kimono.
So cool.
And it's just really cool how like even though she's had these kind of complicated experiences, it's still really important to her to share that part of her culture.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
right? Between like honoring tradition and then also being open to sharing it and allowing it to be experienced by others.
And she even gives some like really great um I don't know, I guess advice, I guess you could say, for how to engage, respectfully with kimono.
Okay.
Like one of the things that she mentions is, like avoiding those really kind of overtly sexualized styles that we were talking about
Yeah,
before.
right. That makes sense. Yeah.
And she really stresses, that it's really about like approaching it from a place of wanting to learn, like a place of respect and not just like taking something because you think it looks cool.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the deeper significance.
Yes.
And approaching it with that reverence.
And this is what I thought was really, really reassuring. Like, she makes it very clear that, like, most Japanese people would be happy to see people wearing kimono as long as it's done with respect.
Oh, it's so nice.
It's not about being, like, exclusionary. It's just about, like, that mutual respect.
I start appreciating the beauty of it.
Yeah. And she brings up another really interesting point, though, too, about cost.
Okay.
Because she talks about how, like, authentic kimono are expensive.
Yeah. And she even like kind of wonders if that's part of the reason why like even younger generations in Japan maybe aren't wearing them as much.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it makes you think like what can you do, to keep those traditions alive?
It's a challenge for a lot of cultures, I think.
Yeah.
Right? How do you preserve those traditions
Yeah.
in a way that makes them accessible to future generations?
Totally, totally. And it's not just about like, a piece of clothing, right? It's about like all the artistry and the craftsmanship that goes into it.
It's about the history. It's about the heritage.
Yeah, and so she kind of talks about, like after all of this, after going through all these different experiences and feelings, she's like, my answer to this question, is it rude? Hmm? It's not so simple anymore. It's like, it's complicated, it's nuanced.
It's a journey, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that, I think anyone who's ever engaged with a culture that's different from their own can relate to.
Totally. It's that push and pull, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to share something that you love, but you also want to protect it and make sure that it's not like, I don't know, taken advantage of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting how she kind of goes through that whole thought process. And she ultimately seems to land on the side of, sharing and opening that door to cultural exchange, which is great.
And she even says, like for people who are maybe like feeling hesitant, like especially people outside of Japan, like she really wants to reassure people, like most Japanese people, they would be happy to see you wearing a kimono. Like it's seen as this like really nice gesture of respect.
Right.
Like you're trying to connect with their heritage and that just
It makes sense.
it's really heartwarming.
It is.
It really is.
Like that's where you really tap into that idea of cultural appreciation, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not just about like tolerance, but it's about understanding and connection.
Yeah.
And just seeing that like shared humanity, even in the face of all our differences.
So well said. So well said. And I think for anyone listening who maybe like has always been kind of drawn to kimono, but maybe felt a little bit, unsure about like actually trying one on or like, you know, how to go about it in the right way. Like, I think her story really gives us a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
it's a good reminder that like engaging with any culture that's different from your own requires like a willingness to learn and to listen and to be open to the fact that you might not always get it right.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah, as long as you're coming at it with an open mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just be respectful.
Exactly. Exactly. And so on that note, you know, I think as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, like I think it's a good time to just kind of think about like how can we each engage with cultures in a way that, you know, honors our own desire to learn, but also the traditions that we're encountering along the way.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind.
And that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but we hope you'll join us next time as we venture into another fascinating topic.
See you then.